Spent the last 6 weeks as a faith community kind of building up to and celebrating and even journeying through Easter on the other side. And so that means we've spent quite a bit of time talking about Jesus' sacrifice and how he took on the sins of humanity, experienced all our brokenness, and defeated death and won a great victory. Defeated the devil and the enemy and all his junk that comes with what he's about, fear, guilt, shame, and all those things. We said as we kind of wrapped up last Sunday, Jesus didn't come just so that we could go to heaven. He came so that we could begin to experience eternal life here and for the rest of our lives and for eternity, right? Eternal life is not just a quantity of life, it's also a quality of life that begins here and now. So this morning, even though we just finished Easter and Jesus' victory, we're actually going to rewind a bit and come back to some of his core teaching about how we should actually live. And we're going to grab this core teaching from Matthew chapter 5, and the chapter starts like this. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up a mountain and he sat down. Right? What follows is what some consider the most kind of complete and central teaching that Jesus gives about his kingdom and what he's about and how we ought to live our lives. And he gives this teaching to a big crowd. Now, why is there a crowd? If you dial back one chapter, you read this. Jesus went all over Galilee. He taught in the synagogues and spread the good news of the kingdom. He also cured every disease and sickness among the people, and large crowds followed him. Right? So Jesus comes, and his message is that the kingdom of God is here. Like the rule and the reign of God is being reestablished on this earth. And it's a message that he talks about and he teaches on, and it's a message that he shows the people. He uses his spiritual authority to heal sickness and disease and cast out demons. So he's talking about it, and he's giving them a glimpse that God actually can make a difference here and now in this world and in this life. And even though he does that in one little geographic region, word spreads. And so later in Matthew 4, you read that people are coming from Galilee, the 10 cities, Jerusalem, Judea, and from across the Jordan River. Jesus is working in one area, but word spreads and crowds come. And when the crowds come, Jesus sees this as an opportunity to teach. We're told when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up a mountain and sat down. Now, Bible scholars will tell you in Jesus' day, this is the posture a teacher would take. The teacher would sit down, and that would be a signal that he's going to teach. His disciples come to him, and he began to teach them. Now, what follows is what some people consider Jesus' kind of spiritual stump speech. Now, political candidates have one speech that they give over and over and over again. Doesn't matter what city, what town. If you travel with them, you're going to hear some version of the same speech over and over and over. And in Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7, it's likely that this is Jesus' central teaching that he gives at least pieces of over and over and over again. And today, and actually for the next 5 weeks, we're going to look at the very first thing that he says. Because I think the very first thing that he says is quite important. Now, I asked you to think about first impressions and how long does it take to make a first impression? How important is it? Research says that you and I begin to form impressions of people within fractions of a second. We look at dress, we look at facial cues, we look at posture, and we begin to make judgments about people, not in a bad way, but to begin to assess them. And often, I just read some research that says about 65% of the time, your gut first impression is right. Now, you're not right all the time, right? 3.5 times out of 10, I'm wrong and you're wrong, and we might have to adjust. But 6.5 times out of 10, your quick read is right. So that's why, mom tells you and teachers tell you and your bosses tell you need to work hard to make a good first impression. So Jesus has a big crowd. What kind of first impression is he going to make? People have flocked to hear him to give his take on God's kingdom and what life lived in friendship with God looks like. What is he going to start with? This is the first impression that Jesus chooses to make. He uses this word, blessed, or depending on how you're reading, blessed, right? This word could be translated fortunate or happy. So when Jesus has a chance to make a first impression, what he basically says is, you can be happy. Now, what do you think? Is that a good first impression? Yeah, most people want to be happy, don't they? Now, I know you know some people who love to be miserable. You got some friends that whenever you ask them how they are, it's always woe is me and the world's horrible, and every Facebook post is, how horrible life is. But by and large, people want to be happy. And it's not just what we want for us, it's what we want for others. Right? When you think about your parents, your siblings, your friends, your kids, your grandkids, you've probably even said, at the end of the day, I just want them to be happy. Right? And so Jesus starts with something we're interested in. And he basically says, you and I on this earth can be happy. You and I can live a blessed life, not just when we die, not just in eternity, not just when all sickness and pain and tears are gone. You and I can be happy here and now. And I think, honestly, this surprises some people because they don't think of God as somebody who wants them to be happy. They think of God as like the cosmic fun police, right? Who's going to make sure you stay in the lines and you stay in the bounds. And if you start having too good a time, he's going to smack you kind of back in the narrow lane of miserable living. If you turn to the beginning of the book, God creates the world and he comes to a conclusion about everything he makes. He makes something and then he looks at it and he says, you know what, this is, what's the word? Good. Like God's intent was to make a really good world. And eventually he makes people and he puts them in a really good world. And he puts them in paradise and they have good food to eat. One of my favorite parts of the whole book. Right? The food's good to look at and it tastes really good and they get good work to do. And the first thing that's not good is loneliness, so God makes a second person, and intimacy and relationship, and it's all good. Do you think that way? Do you think that God's intent is for you to live a good life? So that's what it says at the beginning of the book. And when Jesus has a chance to say, here's what I'm about, people, his first words are, you can live a blessed life. Now, his vision of a blessed life might be different than mine or than yours, and that's what we really want to talk about. This is what he says makes up a good or a happy life. He says, blessed are those who recognize they're spiritually helpless. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are those who are gentle. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for God's approval. Blessed are those who show mercy. Blessed are those whose thoughts are pure. Blessed are those who make peace. Blessed are those who are persecuted for doing what God approves of. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, lie, and say all kinds of evil things about you because of me. Now Jesus has our attention. I like this happy part, but his vision of what makes people happy or fortunate or blessed sounds a lot different from what I see on TV. Does that ring true for you? I mean, I think our culture and the marketers in our culture have their own version of this speech, right? So in our culture, who are the lucky ones? Because you and I, we think other people are luckier than we are. You've got friends and neighbors and you think, if I had their talent, if I had their opportunity, if I had their money, if I was as tall, I could for sure, succeed athletically. Who are the lucky ones in our culture? In fact, this would be a good exercise. This week, sit down and make a list of the people our culture says are blessed. I'm going to give you my list. I don't want it to spoil yours, but we got to keep moving this morning. So here's my take on the blessed list in our culture. Blessed are the talented. Like people who just have extraordinary ability. Blessed are the wealthy who never have a worry about money. Blessed are the beautiful. The people who, without even trying, just look good, right? Blessed are the sharp and the intelligent. Blessed are the healthy. Now, when I said that in first service, which is predominantly an older group, there was an amen, right, from them. Blessed are people whose genetic, downline doesn't include cancer and disease and all those things. Blessed are the powerful who can affect change. Blessed are the well-connected who know people and can get stuff done and can make doors open for them. And blessed are the charismatic. Blessed are those people you just meet them and you want to like them. And everybody seems to be drawn in toward them. Now, does that look like a fair list? Like in our culture, you're lucky if you get this stuff. Yet when you lay Jesus' list against it, it seems kind of disproportionate, doesn't it? Our version of happiness that we sell in our country and around the world looks and feels and sounds and tastes a lot different from what Jesus says will ultimately make us happy and lead to a good life. So what we're going to do in the next 5 weeks is go through Jesus' statements 2 at a time and talk about why is it good to be poor in spirit, or to mourn, or to be a peacemaker, or even to be persecuted. Today we're going to look at these as a group. We're going to kind of take that 30,000-foot view, and we're just going to kind of compare the world's version of happiness against Jesus' version and vision of happiness. And I'm going to do my best to just point out some differences that I see between what I'm told every day will make me happy, will make me call myself blessed. I'll hashtag it, right? Blessed life. And what Jesus actually says will lead us to a good life. Let's start with this. Here's the first difference. It's all about who gets to be happy. Who's going to find happiness? Like in our culture's version, I think it says that happiness is available to a lucky few. And it makes me think of this. Every so often, there's some mega millions jackpot. This was the last one I remember, like $640 million. And I don't pay attention to the lottery at all until it hits a number like this. And then people who don't ever think about the lottery and certainly never buy tickets are all running out to buy tickets. And here's the crazy thing, you know you're not going to win. Right? There's a news story that the jackpot's $900 million, and you watch the news and they say you have a 0.0000123 chance of winning. And yet you're heading out to buy the ticket because you can't win if you don't play, right? And maybe God's intent, somehow we put that around it, is to give you $900 million. You won't know if you don't buy that ticket. I wonder if this is how the world talks about happiness. You've almost got to win the lottery. Happiness is only going to happen for a select few because not everybody gets to be talented, wealthy, beautiful, sharp, well-connected, and all these things. Now, my hunch is that everybody in the room has one of these or a few of these on some level. Like if there's a knob for each of these, somewhere between 0 and 10, you've got something on this list, or I've got something on this list. But if you knew somebody who had everything on this list, they'd be lucky. And you'd probably hate them, right? I don't like her. She's got it all. I don't like him. They're fortunate. They're lucky. Who gets to be happy in Jesus' vision of a blessed life? Not just a select few, but anybody, right? Who is he teaching this stuff to? It's the crowds, right? When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountain and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. He's teaching everybody how they can live a blessed, fortunate, happy, good life. Now, in Jesus' culture, there actually was a very small group of people who kind of were the religious elite. They had a special education. They had special training. They probably were looked at as the blessed, fortunate few. And while they might be in the crowd, Jesus is not teaching this to them. He's teaching it to people like you and me. But the world says, you've got to get really lucky to be happy. And Jesus says, look, anybody can be blessed. Because the stuff on his side of the list, it's stuff that may happen to everybody. You're going to mourn. You're going to be in conflict with somebody and have a chance to make peace. Your pride is going to be tested, and you're going to decide whether you're arrogant or gentle and meek. Right? Anybody can have this stuff. It's the first difference. Right? Who gets to be happy? Not just a select few. Anybody who wants to embrace Jesus' way of living. Here's a second difference, very closely connected to the first, and it's about how do you find happiness? Not just who can have it, but how do you have it? Now, I don't know if you remember a few years ago, there were all these television shows about storage auctions. Do you remember that? There was one, and then it was successful, so then there were 50 of them, right? And if you don't remember, if it's been a few years, if you never watched them, when you put your stuff in a storage unit, you usually sign a contract, and somewhere in that contract is a statement that says, if you fail to pay, after so long, they get to auction off your stuff. This is like that little clause that we now know exists in every airline ticket. If they ask you to get off the plane, you didn't know that was in there the last time you flew. It's in there, apparently. Especially if you fly United. I think it's everybody, right? There's this clause. If you don't pay, we auction your stuff. And sometimes people don't pay. Sometimes somebody dies and nobody knows they have this storage unit. And so they auction the contents. And what these shows all did is they showed us a group of people in our culture who make their living buying whatever's in a storage unit and then reselling it. And here's the catch. At the auction, you don't really get to see everything that's in the unit. Like, I've never been to a storage unit auction, but the way it's portrayed on TV is they roll the door up and you can look from the threshold. And what you see. But you don't open any boxes, you don't get to touch anything, you don't get to move anything. And as I watched these shows, it seemed like there were two approaches. There were some people who were super analytical and calculating. Some of you would be those people. They would look at every item in the thing that they could see and they would add up the prices. And if they saw $700 worth of stuff, that was their max, because they knew, worst case, there's $700 worth of stuff in there. And there were other people, and some of us would be these people, who are much more intuitive. They would notice how things were packed. And if things were packed nicely and looked clean, they assumed there was nicer stuff in there. And if they saw one guitar in there, we all know nobody buys one guitar, right, brother? There's 5 guitars in there, I'm sure there are, right? And if it's bubble wrapped, they took care of, there's got to be something valuable, and they would just kind of pick a number and hope it was in there. It's that second approach that sounds a lot to me like the world's vision of happiness. You either get it or you don't. It happens for you, or it's just not in the cards. It's either somewhere in your DNA, in your opportunity circle, in your life, you're going to get it, or it's just not going to be there. Maybe there is only one guitar in your life, and that would make you really sad, probably, right? Blessed are the talented and the wealthy. You either get this, now, you've got something, and my hunch is that for whatever you've got, there's a floor and a ceiling. If you work really hard and maximize it, you might be able to get your talent up to a 6. And if you don't try and don't practice and don't study, it might go to a 0. Right? Some of us, you're good looking, and if you really worked at it, you could be a 9. And if you really neglected things, it would be a 2. Right? And you would still be ahead of me. We all get this, and there's a ceiling and there's a floor. I was thinking of this the last couple days. My son and I, on and off, were watching the NFL draft, which, if you're a football fan, can be interesting, and if you're not, it's incredibly boring. I like to watch it for a couple of reasons. First, you're watching all these young people, like, kind of their dreams are coming true. This is what they've dreamt of, and they'll show the backstory and where these folks have come from, and some of them have overcome incredible adversity, and this is their path forward. And it's a big moment. That's kind of cool. The thing I really am interested in is I like to watch all the analysts pick these players apart. And the crazy thing is, all these people played football in college, and they were all really good, or they all did pretty well. But now when it comes time to the draft, they try to pick them all apart. Example from a few years ago is a guy named Russell Wilson. Now, I like to watch players get drafted who are at schools I root for. And when Russell got drafted, I was living in Raleigh, North Carolina. He played his first 3 years of college football at NC State in Raleigh, North Carolina. And for those 3 years, he was the best thing we had on the field. Like, there were 4 games a year that he won just by doing what he could do. And then through a series of events, he transferred to Wisconsin. Within a week, he was named a captain on the team, took them to an 11-win season, won a Rose Bowl. Tons of success. Yet when it came to the draft, all the scouts, all the owners had their list. How tall are you? How fast are you? How big are your hands? They measure that, believe it or not. What did you score on the intelligence test? Right? And Russell's biggest challenge is he's 5'11", which means he's probably 5'9", because men lie when it comes to their height. And they never lie up unless they're really tall. They usually lie a little bit down. So he's 5'11", and when he was drafted, there was not a single quarterback in the NFL under 6 feet tall. And 28 of the 32 quarterbacks were 6'2" or higher. And so this guy who had obvious talent, had won a bunch of games, everybody said, well, he's not going to be any good because he doesn't fit our list. Sorry, Russell, you're great, but if you had gotten 2 more inches, then you would be one of the lucky ones. And instead of going with, the first pick or the 10th pick, he went 75th that year in the draft, and within 3 years won a Super Bowl. But no, he's not going to be any good because he didn't check off the box of being over 6 feet tall. And then there's this list that the culture gives, and they look at you and they look at me and they say, man, they seem to have a good life, but they don't check many of these boxes. I don't know how they're going to be happy. They don't seem to be very blessed or fortunate to me. Jesus' vision of happiness is different. The world says, look, it's either in your genetics, it's in your opportunity circle, it's in your family of origin, or it's not. And Jesus says, no, happiness is available not just to anybody, but anybody who would pursue it. Anybody who would decide, I want to live a good life, I want to live a life that God would look at and say, that's a life I bless, right? Here's why I say that. Before Jesus gives his teaching, if you flip back one chapter, he begins to say this. Like, this is kind of the basis of everything he's going to do. Matthew 4:17. From then on, Jesus began to tell people, turn to God and change the way you think and act, because the kingdom of heaven is near. Like, God's authority is being reestablished on this planet. Like, God's coming, and if you want in on it, all you have to do is want it. You can change the way you think and act. Right? The message isn't the kingdom's coming and there'll be a few lucky ones who get in. No. Anybody can turn to God and with his help and with his power begin to change the way they think and act. And that reminds me, there's a connection there, because the way you think often comes out in how you act, right? Jesus says, look, this is under your control. You have authority to change the way you think and the way you act. Now, this passage that we're studying for the next 6 weeks is often called the Beatitudes. And I used to think like it was a perfect name because it's all these things you can be. It's all these attitudes you can have. Like some genius named this. And then I learned that it's actually from a Latin word, which I think is pronounced beatitudines. And if I'm wrong, then I'm wrong, and you probably don't know either. Except I have some scholars in the balcony who probably could tell me if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. And the Latin word means happiness. Now, the word got anglicized, which means we just turn it into an English word, which reminds me of taking Spanish in 9th grade, because my Spanish teacher, Miss Barnett, said, look, we are not going to speak Spanglish in my class, right? And we said, well, what's Spanglish? She says, that's when you take an English word and you add an O on the end, and you now think you're speaking Spanish, right? Because you know taco and burrito, so I'm going to the movio, right? And my caro. So we're not doing that in here, but that's what we did to get the word Beatitudes. And it means happiness. And if you look at these things, they seem to be things you and I can actually choose. You can choose how you view yourself spiritually. You can choose to mourn or choose not to mourn. You can choose to respond either with arrogance or humility. I can choose to hunger and thirst for what God hungers and thirsts for, right? We're all hungry and thirsty, but we can choose what we're seeking to fill that, right? I can choose to show mercy or not to show mercy. You can choose what you think about. You and I can choose to make peace or not when there's conflict. These are all things we have control over. So the world says, you know, not only are the lucky few going to find happiness, but it either's in the cards for you or it's not. And Jesus says, I don't really believe that. I believe that anybody who wants to turn to God can live a blessed life. One more difference we'll talk about quickly this morning. And it's what happiness does for us. Like, if you're blessed, if you're happiness, if you're fortunate, what does that mean in your life? Now, I think the world's answer is this, and on many days it's probably my answer too. Happiness makes your life easy. You'll be happy if life is smooth and there are no troubles and everything goes according to plan. Now, here's why I say that. I want you to imagine something with me. This isn't real. This isn't what we believe in our church. We're just going to play a game for a minute. I want you to imagine that God said today, maybe audibly is probably what it would take for us to believe that we all get to pick one item on this list and he will turn it up in our lives to 10. Okay, so we're going to take 5 minutes. We're all going to pray. You're going to look at the screen, and God's going to show you one area, whatever you want or he shows you, and if you select that area, whatever you've got is going up to 10. What area would you pick? If you could have any of these in your life at a 10, my hunch is whatever you picked, you would pick because it would make your life easier. You would pick wealth because if you had enough money, life would be easy. But I know lots of wealthy people who don't feel like their lives are easy. Some of us would pick beauty because we feel like if we were just better looking, more doors would open. Yet I know lots of beautiful people who feel like they're judged all the time for how they look, right? Some of us would pick health because if I could just get rid of all my health issues, my life would be so much easier. And maybe that's true. But here's the thing. I don't believe, and I could be wrong, this is what I believe, and I get to talk today, I guess, so I get to tell you what I believe. I believe God does not have a lot of interest in making our lives easier. I think that's the first temptation to humanity. Like everything's so good, and here's this one thing that would make your life easier. And we grab it. And all of a sudden life isn't so good anymore, and it's not easy either. I think God's intent is to do something else. Right? I think all of these things, which we would say are not easy. Is it easy to forgive? If you think it's easy to forgive, you've not really been wronged before. Right? Or you're just a special person. Maybe that's turned up to 10 in your life. If you think it's easy to be persecuted, it's easy to be humble when you don't have to be or couldn't be. It's easy to think of yourself as poor in spirit. It's not easy. What do you notice about the hands in this picture? I don't know how bright, it's brighter on this screen than these. Anybody, what do you notice about the hands in this? This is why I picked the image. Not only did it have the right words, that was a plus, but I really like the hands. Anybody notice anything about those hands? Yeah, they're working hands. They're dirty. There's a couple good calluses on those hands, and I think that's a good picture of what a good life looks like. Because we think God's desire is to make our life easy, and it's not. It's to make our life good. And easy and good are not the same thing, often. You know this because it's what you teach your kids. But Dad, that's hard. I know, but it'll be worth it because anything in life worth doing, anything in life worth having is hard, or it takes work, or you got to go to school, or you got to practice, or you got to build your business, and it's hard. God doesn't desire to make life easy, but he does deeply desire to make it good. And so some of these things are super hard, but they'll make life good. Look at what Jesus says. Now, I didn't finish the thought. Maybe it'll make more sense if I finish each of these thoughts. Listen to the outcome of these hard things that God invites us into. Blessed are those who recognize they're spiritually helpless. The kingdom of heaven belongs to them. Blessed are those who mourn. They will be comforted. Blessed are those who are gentle. They will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for God's approval. They will be satisfied. Blessed are those who show mercy. They will be treated mercifully. Blessed are those whose thoughts are pure. They will see God. Blessed are those who make peace. They will be called God's children. Blessed are those who are persecuted for doing what God approves of. The kingdom of heaven belongs to them. It's not easy, but doesn't that sound good? Like all the best stuff in life comes from these attitudes and these choices and these postures that Jesus is inviting us into. So, the good news is it's possible to live a blessed life. Anybody who wants it can. And we'll spend actually the next 5 weeks talking about all the different choices and all the different actions and all the different reactions that God says will lead us toward a blessed life. And if any of that speaks to you in your journey and what you're longing for in life, we hope you'll come back and join us over the next 5 weeks.